Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. On February 20th, the Arizona legislature passed a bill called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It was the first bill of the year to reach the governor's office for her signature. When it arrived, alarm bells began to sound in media outlets across the land. Governor Jan Brewer is tough and smart. She's been the focus of intense negative media attention before, but this was something else entirely. The last two presidential candidates for the Republican Party, John McCain and Mitt Romney, both urged her to veto the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Major organizations said they would not hold conventions in Arizona if she signed the bill into law. The National Football League started making plans to move next year's Super Bowl, scheduled for Phoenix, away from Arizona unless she vetoed the bill. Major corporations threatened to pull out of the state. She eventually caved to the pressure and vetoed the bill. What could cause such an overwhelming reaction? Had Arizona legislators lost their minds? Had they legalized human trafficking? Had they given the state's blessing to euthanizing citizens over the age of 70? No, nothing like that. Last year, I told you about a wedding photographer in New Mexico who politely refused when a same-sex couple asked her to photograph their so-called wedding. I say so-called because same-sex marriage is not legal in New Mexico. The couple complained to the New Mexico Human Rights Commission, which ruled against the Christian photographer. She appealed, and her case eventually went to the New Mexico Supreme Court, which ruled against her too. In other states, bakers and florists have also refused to create wedding cakes or floral displays for same-sex ceremonies, and it has a lot of them in hot water. So the Arizona legislature decided to stand up for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It created a state version of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a federal law that had been passed in 1993 and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. Now, there are two things I want to point out here. First, why would anyone want a photographer to shoot their wedding if they knew the photographer thought that the wedding was fundamentally immoral? If I know a business despises Christians, I don't sue the business or call in the state troopers. I simply don't use their services. It's not like there's only one photographer in Albuquerque, a city of over 500,000 people. If a person took a moral stand against photographing Christians, I would wish her the best, hoping that in the future she would change her mind. But I wouldn't press the issue. Even if she tried, she probably wouldn't do her best work, and her presence would not only make her uncomfortable, but me and my guest as well. And when did it become my civil right to be able to hire any photographer I want? Just the opposite. It should be the photographer's civil right to use her talent in ways that are consistent with their own moral standards. I would think most homosexuals feel the same way. The few who fight such causes, I believe, do so out of spite. Imagine being so deeply embittered that you would try to force a photographer to violate her own deeply held moral beliefs as an in-your-face power play. So why would the NFL use its great economic power to punish the state of Arizona for standing up for the rights of the people of faith? Why would Mitt Romney step into the situation on the side of coercion of speech? That's the thing so few people have mentioned in all of this. We're talking about something even more fundamental than freedom of speech. We're talking about state coercion of speech. Christian photographers, florists, and even bakers are artists. With their hands, their tools, and their creative minds, They make beautiful things that enhance the wedding experience and make God's institution of marriage even more memorable. Now, the state comes in and says, you must use your artistic talents to say that a same-sex wedding is also beautiful, even if you hold a deep belief that it is abhorrent in the eyes of God. That strikes me as immoral to the core. What if I want to make an explicitly evangelical Christian film, and I approach one of the Hollywood's great cinematographers? Should he or she be required to use his or her artistic ability in my Christian film? What if he were a Muslim? What if he were an atheist? What if he thought Christianity was a sham? Would the NFL step in and say that if the state of California didn't force him to shoot my movie, they would stop holding Super Bowls in the state? Would Mitt Romney intervene on my behalf? Would John McCain? The Arizona law shouldn't even need to be a law. We have a constitution that should protect us from having our artistic expression coerced. We have a Bill of Rights that should ensure freedom of speech and religion. But if the people of society throw out God, no human law, not even the Constitution of the United States, can save them. Recently, a ranking Vatican official caused a stir when he expressed very candid but accurate assessment of the current attitude of America and its president. Chief Justice at the Vatican, Cardinal Raymond Burke, told a Polish magazine, the President of the United States has become progressively more hostile toward Christian civilization. He appears to be a totally secularized man who aggressively promotes anti-life and anti-family policies. Much of the mainstream media has written off his comments as a typical Catholic reaction to the Affordable Health Care Act's provisions mandating birth control. But he was clearly talking about more than that. He went on to say, now, Obama wants to restrict the exercise of the freedom of religion to freedom of worship. That is, he holds that one is free to act according to his conscience within the confines of his place of worship, but that once the person leaves the place of worship, the government can constrain him to act against his rightly formed conscience, even in the most serious of moral questions. It's a crucial distinction. At its beginning, the United States Constitution was a controversial document. Anti-federalists, a sizable portion of the electorate, were leery of the potential power of this new national government. Patrick Henry was the firebrand who gave young America its revolutionary war cry, give me liberty or give me death. When he learned of the Constitutional Convention, he said, I smells a rat. The sentiment was widespread. Key to getting the Constitution ratified were the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights. The very first clause of the very first amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Many people refer to it as freedom of worship, but that's not what the clause says. It says, Congress will not establish a religion, nor will it prohibit the exercise of religion. I'm no fan of the United Nations, but even there, freedom of religion and conscience are not limited to the area inside houses of worship. On December 10, 1948, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 18 says, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. Freedom to live out your belief in public or private. Wesley J. Smith, writing in the journal First Things, said, these days, that and $2 will buy you a small cup of Starbucks coffee. Strident secularism is on the march, and freedom of religion is the target, with secularist warriors attempting to drive religious practice behind closed doors by redefining religious liberty down to the hyper-restricted freedom of worship. In practice, that means that the government can make Hobby Lobby provide abortion pills to its employees, or at least that's what it is claiming in a case now pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. Some people will criticize me for using the term abortion pills. In making fun of Hobby Lobby, comedian Jon Stewart said on his show, "Contraception is not the same thing as abortion. That's a scientific fact." Well, he's right. Merriam-Webster defines contraception as deliberate prevention of conception or impregnation. But we're dealing with the federal government here, and the politicians in Washington have a talent for warping the language. They twist words completely out of shape and give them whole new meanings. So it is with the word contraception. The Obamacare mandate covers anything the Food and Drug Administration approves of and calls contraception. In their written materials, the FDA describes different kinds of contraception pills, including this: a few interfere with a fertilized egg attaching, implanting in the womb or uterus, which is essential for a viable pregnancy. Once an egg is fertilized, conception has occurred, and contraception becomes impossible. Another name for a fertilized egg is human embryo. To kill the human embryo is not contraception. It is abortion. Maybe Jon Stewart hadn't heard about that when he was making fun of Hobby Lobby. And maybe Americans would be smarter not to get their facts from late-night comedians, but in large numbers they do. You can read article after article on the Hobby Lobby case, and almost all of them will say that Hobby Lobby is trying to get out of Obamacare's contraception mandate. Almost none of them tell you the truth. The company provides insurance coverage for 16 of the 20 types of birth control. They just want a religious exemption for having to pay for 4 of the types, such as the pill called Plan B, that can destroy babies. Some people even take exception to using the term baby to describe a human embryo. Okay, let's call it an embryo because that's what human life is called at that stage of development. Later, we'll use the words like fetus, infant, toddler, adolescent to describe them. Kill them at any of those stages, and they're dead, and they will not go on to the next stage of human life. Is an embryo or fetus alive? Obviously. Is it an entity unto itself with its own separate DNA? Yes. What species of life is it? Human? So if you kill it, what have you killed? Human life. And in a few months, the Supreme Court will come back with an answer in this important case. We live in a country where the Amish are exempted from fighting in wars, where Jehovah's Witnesses' children are exempted reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a long tradition of giving exemptions to people who conscientiously object to certain laws and rules. Why not give an exemption to those who oppose paying for the destruction of infant human lives? Cardinal Burke said, "The President of the United States has become progressively more hostile toward Christian civilization." I understand what he's saying, but the United States is a democracy. Its president is a reflection of its people. You have perhaps an even more accurate sentence if you remove this first 3 words, the president of, and just say, the United States has become progressively more hostile toward Christian civilization. He said the president appears to be a totally secularized man who aggressively promotes anti-life and anti-family policies. But he could say, the United States appears to be a totally secularized society which aggressively promotes anti-life and anti-family policies. Now, that ought to scare a few people. I'll be back in just a moment. Last week in Los Angeles, moviegoers were sitting through a showing of the new motion picture, Noah. The title character was making a rather silly speech about whether mankind is worthy of survival when the theater began to rumble. A 5.1 earthquake hit. When you're at a movie depicting, even inaccurately, the judgment of God against humanity, and the very ground beneath you begins to shake, and the theater starts to sway like a ship on a stormy sea, apparently it has quite an impact. In the last 5 years, people have experienced earthquakes in places where they never have been before. Jesus said in the last days there would be earthquakes in various places. It's fascinating that he used the phrase various places. Why did he need to say that? He could have just said there will be earthquakes. I think the phrase carries a connotation of earthquakes in unexpected places. According to Los Angeles Times, the central and southern U.S. have seen a 20-fold increase in small earthquakes during the past few years. An area near Fort Worth, Texas, recently saw a swarm of earthquakes, an area where before 2007 there had never been an earthquake. In November of 2011, a 5.7 magnitude quake hit just outside of Oklahoma City, the largest ever to hit that state. According to Mother Jones magazine, it injured 2 people, destroyed 14 homes, toppled headstones, closed schools, and was felt in 17 states. It was preceded by a 4.7 foreshock the morning prior and followed by a 4.7 aftershock. Joe Renault told the magazine it started with a horrendous bang like an airliner crashing in your backyard. The dust was flying and we were hanging onto the bed watching the walls go back and forth. The mirror in the vanity exploded as if somebody blew it out with a shotgun. It lasted about a minute. When it was over, he found every corner of the house was fractured. In California, everyone knows earthquakes happen, and they should be ready for them. But in Oklahoma, when most people hear about the huge new increase in earthquakes, they don't relate it to Bible prophecy because we're pretty sure we know the cause. Hydraulic fracturing, usually called fracking. It's a relatively new process of getting more gas and oil out of the ground. It's been an economic boom to the United States, turning this country into the world's #1 petroleum producer. There are many ecological concerns with fracking, including earthquakes. And because most people believe this is the reason for both the increase in earthquakes and the earthquakes happening in diverse places, they discount it as having nothing to do with the Bible. But think about that. Jesus didn't say we would not know why there was an increase in earthquakes or that we wouldn't know why they were happening in such unexpected places, just that they would. The cause is beside the point. The point is that Jesus said it would happen in the days leading up to his second coming. He said they would be like birth pangs. They would increase in frequency and intensity, but certainly they would increase in different places that were unexpected. You can blame it on fracking, but you're still left with the question, how did Jesus know about fracking? Jesus told us 2,000 years ago about today's stunning rise in pestilences, or virulent diseases, something I've documented on this program many times. 2,000 years ago, he told about an end-time rise in nationalism. Nation will rise against nation, or ethnic group against ethnic group, and kingdom against kingdom. That verse means more than countries fighting one another. It's also about a splitting of nations along racial and linguistic lines. We're seeing that today all over the world. The crisis in the Ukraine and Crimea is a perfect example. This is just one verse where Jesus says certain signs will take place leading up to the time of his return. After the recent earthquake in Los Angeles, Caltech scientists explained that there was a slightly elevated chance of an even greater earthquake taking place in the hours that followed. One of the reporters asked Caltech's Lucy Jones what people should do to be prepared for what might happen that night. Jones answered that people should do that night what they should have already done. Things like make sure your child isn't sleeping under a heavy bookshelf or under a glass picture frame. To the believers, these signs also point to Jesus returning soon. What should you do? Same answer. Do now what you should have already been doing. If you haven't accepted salvation in Jesus, do it now. If you're a Christian, let the nearness of Jesus' coming be an impetus to live an uncompromised Christian life. Hebrews chapter 12 says, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. We can all testify to just how easily sin entangles us. Sin gets us out of fellowship with the Lord and hinders the Holy Spirit from guiding and empowering us to resist sin. There's one crucial command in these verses that gives us the answer. The Greek word is apharao. It is a participle in the present tense that commands us to keep on doing something. The root meaning of apharao is to look off and away from all that distracts us from focusing on someone. In this case, it is to tenaciously focus on Jesus and how he fought with combat faith in tough times. He is the supreme example of how faith works in times of trial. Knowledge of his soon return should encourage us to spread the gospel with urgency and not in the church house only. We must focus on the soon coming time when we will be with Jesus, who will reward us for every act of faith in testifying for him now. Finally, signs of his soon return should put us on the lookout for Jesus himself. Few things will help us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, quite like living in the expectation of his soon return. To his protege, Timothy, Paul wrote, in the future, there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Love his appearing. Watch, not in dread, but in hopeful expectation. Be comforted by it. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 says, but we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord shall not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Well, that's it for tonight. God bless you, and God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit HalLindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.